We live in a world that associates personal stock on material wealth. Drive a Ferrari to meet your future in-laws. Maybe show up at an interview in an Armani suit. Perhaps roll up to your local bike club riding a S-Works Venge. Sadly, your chances of success and the chances that others will give you are oftentimes colored and tainted by assumptions based around your perceived material wealth. And sadly, on the surface, watches are simply that. In a world that judges you based on your skin color, it's not so difficult to fathom that watches are nothing more than pieces of jewelry that display not only time, but material wealth. Inherently, material goods are worthless and have no real value other than the value of the actual materials used. However, we as humans attach feelings to objects, and this is what really gives a watch its value. Whether it be the one that was present when you said, "I do," or the one that your newborn clung to in its initial grasp, or the night that you got so drunk and high you couldn't keep looking at anything other than your wristwatch. Watches and the memories you have with them are what makes a timepiece truly priceless. No matter the dollar figure behind a watch, at the end of the day, a watch is a tool to tell time. A luxury item for many around the world that are fortunate, and for those that are unfortunate, it's an item of luxury far out of their reach. Hello, my name is Martin, and I have a lust for watches. I've been blessed in this life to have had the opportunity to own not just one, but multiple watches. And today, I'd like to share with you one of my most cherished watches from my collection that's been through thin and thick with me. I'd like to speak to you about a watch from Seiko, the SBDC051. To really understand my viewpoint of this watch, I'll have to share a bit of my past with you, so please bear with me. Seiko. Like many others that are into watches, I was initially bit by the watch bug due to Seiko. I was young, I was poor, and the thought of spending a dollar figure that went into 3 digits on a watch was unheard of. Yet there was a Japanese watchmaker enabling my lust, as they provided a gateway into horology that would eventually lead to an obsession. Seiko has a long and rich history of watchmaking, and when I first got into watches during the turn of the millennium, it was really the golden age of the affordable Seiko. All the rage at the time was the SKX and SARB, yet I had always wanted to go against the grain, and went with a first-generation orange monster as my first Seiko. This single purchase sparked an interest in me for all things Seiko, and has never really let me go. Fast forward to March 2018. It's been almost 20 years since I had first gotten into watches, and had by this time gotten a career and was making some financial gain. My watch collection had grown a bit. I'd gotten a few more watches, all Seiko of course, no other brands. Lurking through watch forums, when I first saw this diver online, I felt the initial surge of lust and desire for an object that no man should ever admit to, let alone divulge it to the unknown public on YouTube, but so be damned, I wanted it bad. I looked at the price. It was over $1,000. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't poor either. I could afford it, but spending over $1,000 for a Seiko was a tough pill to swallow, and I was really getting heart palpitations from anxiety of whether or not I should pull the trigger. I had already spent a tidy sum on a grand Seiko by this point, so it wasn't exactly out of reach, but it was just another Seiko. It took me a few days to realize that I wasn't going to get any better, and that no doctor in the world was going to cure me of gas. And so the journey of my life with SBDC051 began. Click. Order confirmed. I didn't care that it had Zaratsu finishing on it. I didn't even care that it had a 6R15 inside. I was just so into the aesthetics of the watch that I turned a blind eye towards anything else. Perhaps it was due to my initial watch chair being stolen by the orange monster that I fell so in love with the SBDC051. It was chunky, it had the arrow pointed hour, and it had a crown at 3 o'clock, a big departure for me and my monsters at the time. So then the waiting game would begin. It was a long journey from Japan to Canada for a watch, and my anxiety wasn't getting any better. Then the day arrived. I couldn't hold my excitement in as I slowly cut the cardboard box open and slid the watch box out. I started to get sweaty palms and clammy fingers while I tried to open the box. Then the watch appeared. It had a bit of condensation on the watch face as it acclimated to my warm one-bedroom apartment. As I took hold of it and peeled the stickers off and gave it a good wipe, I couldn't help but feel utterly gutted. It wasn't anything like I thought it would be. It was too thick, it was too wide, it was, dare I say, even possibly considered ugly. I quickly thought to myself, what had I done? Was this thing supposed to be worth $1,000? Let's take an in-depth look today at the SBDC051 and try to answer this question. As always, we need to discuss history. The SBDC051 was released in 2017 along with the much coveted and much more expensive limited run of SLA017, a faithful reproduction of the original 6217 diver from 1965, Seiko's first dive watch, also known as 62 Mas. SBDC051, the black version with bracelet, and SBDC053, a blue version with rubber strap, were supposed to be more modern interpretations or reimaginations of the same original diver. But as consumers advised Seiko with their dollars spent, it was clear that neither the 051 nor the 053 hit the mark close enough. By June 2020, Seiko, having had close conversations with consumers and their wallets, realized that they needed something more akin to what the original 62 Mas had, and resolved to release the newest kid on the block, the much beloved and fan favorite SBDC101. Currently on its second generation, the SBDC101 has come to reign crown and act as king to all 62 Mas reinterpretations. In retrospect, and as a Seiko lover, it is clear as day why SBDC101 was chosen as the poster child of the 62 Mas reinvigoration. It has that vintage vibe, yet brings along with it all the modern stylings and technological innovations of the modern day. So where does that leave the SBDC051? Is it left to languish as the bastard child having no future, or any hope of ever being popular? It's not so certain, and much like many of us during our youth, its future is cloudy, and still, even after 5 years of release, it still faces an uphill challenge in that Seiko will most likely never make a second generation of the watch, and it will only serve as a bookmark in Seiko's many watches that ended up as failures. In terms of lineage, the original 62 mass was conceived by Taro Tanaka, a fresh young graduate at the time who had designed the watch with Tatsuro Akabane, two giant pillars in Seiko design and pioneers of Seiko's grammar of design philosophy. The 62 Moss was named as such from Seikomatic self-dater, and the 6217A movement inside, which is from the 62 caliber family. The original small crown 62 Moss had no prototypes and was pushed into production for a short-lived 3 months. Even with the push, it still failed to be geared for the Japanese Antarctic research expedition on November 20th, 1965, which was its original goal. However, disregarding its target, it was improved upon with a bigger crown and began to make circulation throughout Japan. As SBDC051 is only a reinterpretation and not an actual copy of the original, I won't delve too deep into the history of 62 Moss, but if you are so inclined, there is a book by Sadao Rugo titled The Birth of the Seiko Professional Diver's Watch, where most of these facts have been recorded. Let's talk specs. First, the watch has a wingspan of 49.8 millimeters, 42.6 millimeters width excluding crown, 45.5 millimeters width including crown, and a 20 millimeter lug width. Case thickness comes in at 13.8 millimeters. It weighs 189 grams and has a water resistance rating of 20 atm. Inside is a 23 joule 6R15 automatic movement with manual winding and hacking. It stores 50 hours of power reserve and has a date display. Curved sapphire crystal with AR coating on the inside. LumiBrite on all hands and indices except 3 o'clock. Case and bracelet is stainless steel and has a super hard coating applied. It has a unidirectional bezel, which is steel and has a lacquer finish over it. It has a screw-down crown and a screw-down caseback. I purchased the watch for 800 USD, and I purchased it in March 2018 in Canada from Seiya, Japan. The watch retails for 1000 USD and is available still today after 5 years since its release for the same price I paid then, 800 USD. The watch was originally released on 21st of July 2017. I could just say it is a black dial and move on. However, much like looking at a piece by Mark Rothko, there's something to be said about a single color. And even to give a nod to another American painter, like Jackson Pollock's work, there's movement in that fine-grained dial. It could be said to be a sunburst, but it's not so strong of one that I'd describe it as such. It's more akin to looking at different shades of snow on a gray day. The Seiko name is printed onto the dial along the top, and printed at the bottom is the Prospex X logo, an automatic diver's 200 meters. And lastly, in very, very small text on both sides of the 6 o'clock index is printed Japan 6R15- on the left and 03K0R2 on the right. The date window is well cut out, there's no jagged edges, and there is a printed border that's rounded at the corners to match the rounded borders of the cutout exactly. A very nice detail that's oftentimes overlooked by other watch manufacturers, even Seiko at times at their lower tiered offerings. Hate seeing those right angle date windows bordered by rounded frames. Just bugs me and makes my OCD go rampant. There's an almost matte finished chapter ring that has the minute markers printed on it, with every fifth one being bold. Applied indices filled with Seiko's LumiBrite. The indices are a real showstopper on this watch. Each one is framed with a highly reflective polish that really makes them pop, even if the lume is low, which it never really ever is. The regular hour indices have a tapering towards the center of the dial in their trapezoidal form. The 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock indices are rectangular, with the 12 o'clock index favoring the double lollipop. Just massive indices that really glow. From an aesthetic viewpoint, I really appreciate the tapering, as it gives the dial more negative space instead of just trying to put too much onto the plate. The tapering really leads the eye towards the center of the watch and puts the focus where the hands are. The handset is monstrous, and I mean this in a good way, but also a bad way as well. Much like the Monster line of watches from Seiko, the hour hand has a arrow tip, and it's not as sharp as the Monsters, but it does have a very similar shape. One of the bad things is that at times when I look at it, it does sort of remind me of a house with a really big attic, though I guess that could be good for some others. Not really sure what to think about that. The tips of both the hour and minute hand also don't come to a point. It's docked, much like how they chop the ends of dogs' tails. If it was like a rounded docking, I could be persuaded to enjoy them, but it just comes to sort of a abrupt end, as if it was almost an afterthought. I always felt that the minute hand should have had more shape to it, or the hour hand shouldn't have been so bulbous, or the second hand should have more meat on it. It just never felt very cohesive. These three hands are all going in different directions. The level of polish on the hour and minute hands aren't as polished as the indices, but the second hand is. The second hand is one of the highlights, and I find that the thinness of it really helps the watch capture the elegance aspect. In harsh contrast to the bold hour and minute hands, it brings a nice balance to the handset. However, it's difficult to overlook the incohesive design. All three hands just trying to go different ways. LumiBrite. I won't say more. It's in the case design that the watch really starts to separate itself from the rest of the field. It has brushed tops and sides, with the tops having a circular grain that encircles the center of the watch. The sides have a grain that goes along the vertical axes of the watch. There are two high polished bevels. The one that runs the top side is tight at 1.5 millimeters of thickness, squeezing down to about 1 millimeter of thickness as it goes around the bezel grip. The bevel on the bottom is curved, and almost 4 millimeters of it at the thickest, and tapers down to about 2 millimeters by the tip of the lugs. If anything could really encapsulate the beauty of the watch, it's none other than these two bevels, especially the bottom one. Yes, it makes the watch comfortable to wear due to the shaping, but also just the lines that you get out of it. It's really such a beautiful curvature you get that's not found in any other diver that I own from Seiko. To quote the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, form follows function. The best way to demonstrate this is to compare the cases with two contenders. This is the SBDC051 here. This is the SBDC101 here, 62 mass poster boy. This is the SBDC081 here. It's a 3rd gen green sumo. And you can see that all three cases sport the same two bevels. And yet here's the biggest difference. On the SBDC101, the bottom bevel doesn't wrap as much as SBDC051, so you are left with a bigger side profile, which makes the watch look and feel chunkier than it should. On the SBDC081, the bottom bevel flares out, making the lug ends appear thicker, though still only being 20 millimeters. It could be said that the Sumo, as its name implies, has almost a comical quality to the bevels being so large. SBDC051 really makes a case for itself as being the most elegant and refined of the three I've shown so far. The SBDC051 does present itself as one of the most understated cases, even with its width almost at 43 millimeters. The watch does wear smaller, and even compared to the SBDC101, which is a whole 2 millimeters smaller, it pretty much feels the same to me on my 7-inch wrist. It does help that the chapter ring is on a shallower gradient than the SBDC101, which has no chapter ring and instead has a ray haut that even a mountain bike would fear. There are drilled lugs for easy swapping of the bracelet, and the screw-down crown is unsigned. Having an unsigned crown doesn't mean much to me, but I know that this is a big letdown for a watch at $1,000 USD retail for most others, and is a big complaint of Seiko in general. On the back of the watch is a laser-etched screw-down caseback with the Seiko Wave logo embossed in the middle, as is usual. The bezel is a stainless steel bezel with a lacquer finish, so not as scratch resistant as ceramic or sapphire, but as you can see in my ownership, the bezel still looks pretty solid. Due to its lacquer finish, it does have a different reflective property to it than others, and overall it fits the watch aesthetic quite well. I like how the polish is there and you don't need a pair of sunglasses to look at it during sunny days. The bezel action is at best poor, I'd say. Seiko could have done a better job in this regard, and there is quite a bit of backplay, but I suppose that makes bezel alignment a non-issue. The clicks are soft and feel almost like a wet noodle, and I find that it gets moved by the slightest breath of the wind. The watch has a 6R15 movement inside, and it's a fairly run-of-the-mill type of movement from Seiko. It's not going to win any COSC certificates anytime soon, as it has a tolerance of -15 to +25 seconds per day. But I find that to be a non-issue for me, as I tend to rotate watches every day, or shamefully even multiple times in a day. 50 hours of power reserve, so it's good enough to put it down on a Friday and pick it up on a Monday. The beat rate chugs along at a modest 21,600 bph and has 23 joules packed inside. It can hand wind and hack, so it's possible to sync to whatever, but with such deviation, what's the point? A fairly well-made bracelet. At the onset of my ownership, I had the watch on the manufacturer's bracelet for the longest time, and I was doing a fair bit of travel and the watch was going in and out of water. I slowly then transitioned to a rubber strap, and of late I've been wearing it on multiple forms of leather straps, with the bracelet and rubber strap making an entrance every once in a while for good old time's sake. The bracelet is the usual fanfare. It's got a milled clasp at least, though I don't really care and could easily have used a pressed clasp if it meant saving a bit of weight and thickness. I can't really think of the last time I messed up a pressed clasp. I'm not really Hercules here. It's a solid bracelet, and it has pins and collars as is usual for Seiko. Has 4 holes of micro adjustment, which is nice, and has a diver's extension, but let's be honest, who actually goes diving in these? I personally don't dive, can't even swim, but if I did, wouldn't I just use an Apple Watch anyways? Never had any hairs get pulled. In retrospect, it's actually a really good bracelet. There's no rough edges on the clasp to put gouges on desks or children. It's got enough tactility to it to make you feel like you're holding on to quality. 2 push and release with fold-over clasp, which is easy enough to operate, and I find myself playing with it from time to time. The pros. It's a BBW, big beautiful watch. It's chunky, as I have mentioned, but with the chunk comes the extra junk that you love. I especially love the case design and how the case seems so streamlined and elegant for a diver. It's hard not to think of the watch at times as a dress watch due to the elegant casework. The indices really do pop against the dial. Their polished borders and the muted dial, the contrast that you have between these two elements gives the watch a classic vibe. Those hands, albeit monstrous in their design, are still, after all the trash talking I did to them, one of the main reasons why I love this watch so much. It's bold, striking, and unlike anything else in my collection. It could be close to the monster hands, but it's not as sharp and not as aggressive. Even the docking of the hands gives it a subtle passive appearance that lends itself to its dressier half. I just like looking at the watch. As I ponder the aesthetics of the watch, it really amazes me how beautiful the watch really is. The angles it showcases, the slabs of polish and brush surfaces it dances between, the lugs that look just a little bit soft by their roundedness. There's a whole lot to take in with each passing glance of the watch, and is a major reason why it's seriously a killer watch. In comparison as well, it's hard to refute the beauty of the watch as it simply exudes diver, but elegant dressy. Just like how in the beginning of True Lies, the protagonist Harry takes off a dive suit and comes out in a tuxedo. This watch really embodies that spirit of duality. For the cons, there's no applied anything other than the indices. I wish Seiko had spent the money and applied the logo and the Prospex X brand. It appears larger than it actually is. Many people decide to purchase a watch unseen. It's the nature of the online purchases, and I am sure that many would be turned off simply by looking at the numbers on the spec sheet. So I say it's a con, but it could be a pro as well. I certainly don't recommend the watch to smaller wrists. However, as a watch wears smaller than the numbers, it's a good fit for anyone that's looking for a slightly bigger watch but still need it to look smallish. It's a love-hate relationship, but the handset causes me grief and pleasure. I wish it was more cohesive to the overall package of the watch, and a bit more focus was put into marrying the hands to the watch. It seems too much of an afterthought, and I am not so sure what Seiko was thinking here. The watch is thick. I know it's a diver, and divers can't be less than 15 millimeters and must have a water resistance of 2,000 meters or something ridiculous. At least your watch would survive long before your head gets squished by water pressure free diving into Mariana Trench. Last time I checked, there's a ton of thin divers more than capable of 200 meters of water resistance, and also feature a exhibition case back. So what's going on here, Seiko? The thickness also doesn't help trimming a bit of the fat from the watch. No one wants to walk around with a 200-gram weapon on their wrist, do they? Or maybe they do. Depends on where you live, I guess. Would I ever repeat this purchase should I lose or break the watch beyond repair? Surprisingly, no, I don't think I would. This watch has long lost its meaning to me as SBDC051, and instead it became like my lifelong partner, and I can't replace that with money. or so I say. Usually my final thoughts are short and brief, as I feel like I had already discussed all the merits for and against the watch by this point, but today's watch deserves an extended version of final thoughts. As I had mentioned at the onset of the video, watches are material goods that possess sentimentality, and that's why we value them so much. A handmade mechanical watch that required a skilled artisan 10,000 hours of experience to craft is just as valuable as a machine-stamped quartz watch to someone that simply needs to tell the time. And it could be said the quartz watch would be of more value should accuracy be of importance. It's not due to the dollar value behind the watch that determines whether or not a watch is valuable. It's the sweat and tears and sometimes even blood you spilled onto these watches that really up their value over time in your life and bring them to a level where they just cannot be replaced. So as watch collectors, it's really up to you, as the user, to place value and find meaningful resonance with the watches you grow a connection to. It doesn't matter if it's a Timex from Walmart or a piece of high horology from the likes of AP or VC or PP. All that matters is the value put into the watch, and it doesn't matter what others think. Watches are personal items and should be treated as such, not as mere material goods to impress others. This specific watch has been with me through a lot of good and bad times. It's so ingrained into my life experience that I could never just replace it with another copy. There's dings and nicks on the watch that remind me of my stupidity and also remind me of times when my children took the watch for a spin around the house. I suppose it's like this with all material goods. It's not the actual value of the goods, but what you put into it that really make their true value shine. I take a look at my watch collection every day when I go to pick out a watch, and I can tell you that of all the watches, this watch is one of the most valuable watches to me. No matter how ugly or how monstrous the watch could be described, it is for me at the end of the day one of the most beautiful and amazing timepieces I've had the pleasure of owning. In my research for this video, I kept running across attempts by others at giving this watch a nickname, as many of us fanboys like to do. As a watch that's not so popular and will probably be forgotten in the annals of Seiko failures, nothing really has stuck. For me personally, I can't help but think of giving this watch the name of Tsundere, to honor the time I hated this watch, to the present where I'd fallen in love and didn't even realize it. Thank you for watching to the end, and let me know in the comments what you think of the watch. Do you have any watches that you started out hating, but over time you have grown fond of and go so far as to call it love? If you like this video and would like to see more, you know what to do. Until next time, keep it real. Bye bye.